Fellas, there are a few champions in the UFC that are absolutely hated and despised by the MMA community, and then there's other champions who are, well known for being liked and very respected fighters. So I'm going to be going through every single current champion in the UFC in the male divisions and ranking them by likability. So I'll be starting off with the first champion as the most likable, and then all the way down to the champion who I think is the most hated, or at least the most disliked champion in the UFC right now. Let me know if you'd agree with this list. Starting off with the most liked champion in the UFC, or I call it the extremely likable column. Up first, we've got Alex Pereira. I think Pereira is the most liked champion in the UFC. I don't see how you can dislike Alex Pereira unless you're a huge Adesanya fan and you've got something against Pereira. I just don't see how you can dislike Alex Pereira. He's a fairly quiet guy. He doesn't come out with outrageous takes. He seems like a hard-working guy with a good story behind him. He's an entertaining fighter. He's a good addition to the UFC. He's got a great character. He's even now posting skits online to try and, raise his personality. So I just don't see how you can dislike Alex Pereira. He's the definition of a champion. He's actually improved his, even though he doesn't really speak a lot. I like how he's at least trying to develop his personality. Doesn't come out with outrageous takes, and overall, I just think it's impossible to hate Alex Pereira. Even if you're an Adesanya fan, even if I was an Adesanya fan, I'd find it hard to dislike Alex Pereira. The only circumstance where I can kind of find it acceptable for you to dislike Alex Pereira is if you look at his fan base as a reflection of him, because one thing I will say is we've seen in like press conferences and online, the Alex Pereira's fan base, like the strong Alex Pereira fans, do seem to be some of the weirdest fans in the UFC. I don't know what it is about them, but they've got some weird obsession over Alex Pereira, and they like to take it out on other fighters. But on the general basis, most Pereira fans are alright, or at least some of them. And yeah, I just think Alex Pereira is impossible to dislike the guy. Even if you're Adesanya's biggest fan, how can you hate this guy? He's entertaining to watch. He's becoming a good personality in the UFC. He's a great addition overall. So the most liked champion, in my opinion, is Alex Pereira. And then on that same list, I've gone with Pantoja. Now, Pantoja, again, is just another guy with a good story. He's got a good story behind him. He doesn't come out with outrageous takes. He's not an extremely disliked fighter, and that's why I've put him in the likable column. I think he's, again, a guy that you can't really hate unless you absolutely hate the flyweight division, because I will admit flyweight is definitely one of the weaker divisions in the UFC. It's not one of the most liked divisions, so maybe people dislike the flyweight division and therefore they dislike Pantoja, or maybe there's just a lot of strong Brandon Moreno fans who just want Moreno to be a champion and they dislike Pantoja. And I will admit, Pantoja hasn't got the most interesting style. It depends. I feel like it depends what Pantoja shows up. Sometimes he'll show up and he'll go for a scrap like he did against Moreno, and then sometimes he'll have like underwhelming performances. Well, not underwhelming performances, but not the most interesting performances against guys like Brandon Royval. Overall, I wouldn't say he's this massive personality like Alex Pereira, but I would say it's hard to dislike Pantoja. He's got a good story behind him. He's a hard-working champion, and you can't help but respect the guy. So I'm going with Pantoja in Likeable. Then the next tier is going to be Likeable, but with some flaws. First fighter in that list is Islam Makhachev. Now, the reason Islam Makhachev is likable, I mean, first of all, he's really exciting to watch. If you like fun fighters, Islam Makhachev's the guy for you. Almost getting finishes in every fight. He's super well-rounded, and he's not just a classic lay and pray that a lot of people seem to connect to his name. That's one thing I've noticed. A lot of people just hate Islam Makhachev because he's Dagestani. Not because of his actual fighting style, but just because he's Dagestani and he's from Russia. A lot of people just seem to dislike Islam Makhachev. But I'd say the main reason is because most people just hate the fact that Islam Makhachev keeps beating our favourite fighters. We all love Alexander Volkanovski. He beats him the first time and then knocks him out in the second. Charles Oliveira has a huge fan base. He finishes Charles Oliveira and ends the Charles Oliveira era in the lightweight division. And because of that, a lot of people just have something against Islam Makhachev. They think they hate the fact that he keeps beating our favourite fighters, and for that reason they hate Islam Makhachev and the fact that he's Dagestani. But overall, again, he doesn't come out with these outrageous takes. He's not a super controversial guy. I think he's a pretty fair guy in the division, and a lot of people have been hating on him for not defending against any lightweights. He was scheduled against Charles Oliveira, and Charles Oliveira pulled out, so you can't even hate Islam for that reason. I can see why some people might dislike him, but overall, he's not. I don't think he warrants you to hate the guy. He seems like just a hard-working guy, and at least his performances are entertaining. So I'll give Islam Makhachev. I'll put him in the likable, but with a few flaws. And then just below Islam Makhachev, I've gone Leon Edwards. Now, Leon Edwards I don't think he's this super interesting guy. He's not a guy that's oozing with personality. His fights aren't absolute bangers either, but at the same time, he just comes across as a nice, normal guy. He doesn't come across like an idiot. He seems fairly respectful. He seems like a nice guy who just wants to get things done. And I think a lot of people, because of that, and he's, like I said, the Rocky story as well, the fact that he was begging for a title shot and he's now become the champion, I think you've got to respect him for that. But the reason he's now lower down on the list is because I feel like he's a little bit of a hypocrite. Now, what I mean by that is when he was a contender, he was always crying about the fact that he's on a win streak and he deserves a title shot and this and that. It was always whinging to Kamaru Usman about the fact that he never got his title shot. And then he becomes the champion. And now he's refusing to defend against guys like Belal Muhammad. I know he accepted Shavkat, Hamzat and Islam, but then he's always saying that Belal Muhammad doesn't deserve a title shot. And in fact, Gilbert Burns deserves a title shot more. And I just think it's kind of hypocritical when he was in the exact same position that Belal was in. But overall, not the most interesting guy, but a respectable guy. So I'm going to put Leon Edwards in the likable, but with a few flaws here with Islam Makhachev. Finally on this list, we have, well, finally on the likable with some flaws list, we have Dricus du Plessis. Now, I feel like Dricus du Plessis has definitely come slightly more disliked ever since the fight with Sean Strickland, just because of how big Sean Strickland's fan base is. Now, I wouldn't call Dricus du Plessis disliked, just period, because first of all, he's really proud to represent his country, and he's obviously got a lot of heart. You look at his fights, his stamina's terrible, he's not got the most technical style, but he's always able to pull off the win, and he said that he's going to become a champion a while ago, and that's exactly what he's done. He's proud to represent his country. He's got insane heart, and it shows in his fights that he digs deep to get the win. And I think when you watch a guy like that, it automatically makes you respect them. So I wouldn't say Dricus du Plessis comes across as unlikable, even in his interviews as well. It's not like he's coming out with these crazy takes. I know I've said that about 50 times now, but it's not like he's coming out with these, outrageous things that he's saying. So he seems like a fairly respectful guy, but people don't like the fact that he won a close fight with Sean Strickland. I've noticed this a lot in MMA. Whenever there's a robbery, a lot of the fans will immediately go and attack the guy who won as if it was their fault. I understand Dricus du Plessis is, he's obviously not going to say it's a robbery himself because he's the champion of the world. But ever since, the fight with Strickland, a lot of the Sean Strickland fans, a lot of his fans have gone over and swarmed to Dricus du Plessis to show how much they dislike the decision, and the fact that they don't think he should be champion, and the fact that Strickland's going to become a champion again. And some people just don't like the style of Dricus du Plessis. They don't like watching a brawler. They like watching a more technical guy fight, like maybe an Adesanya or a Strickland. No, a lot of fans just don't really want to watch a guy who's as kind of a messy striker in Dricus du Plessis. So for likable with some flaws, I've gone Dricus du Plessis. Definitely not an unlikable fighter. When you think of unlikable fighters, Dricus du Plessis isn't the guy to come to mind. But I think he's got to get on this list on the likable with some flaws, because he's definitely not one of the most liked in the UFC. So yeah, Dricus du Plessis, likable with some flaws. The next tier we've got is unlikable. Fighters who aren't hated. See, I wouldn't despise these fighters, but they do come across as quite unlikable. First of all, we've got Sean O'Malley. Now, one thing that's keeping Sean O'Malley so high on this list is his performances. Sean O'Malley, in my opinion, is the most exciting champion currently in the UFC roster. It's impossible to not be a fan of Sean O'Malley fights. His Marlon Vera fight was one of the most interesting fights in the UFC. The way he was piecing up Marlon Vera and battering him for 5 rounds straight. His entire resume of just knockouts, the sterling knockout that he got when nobody was expecting. His scrap with Peter Yan. If there's one thing you can't deny about Sean O'Malley, he's a fun fighter, but as a person, I just have no interest in listening to this guy. He's one of the most boring fighters at a press conference. I think his trash talk is terrible. I hate the fact that he just dislikes every bantamweight. He just seems to have this really defensive mindset against every bantamweight. It's almost as if he's aware that everyone dislikes him, and for that reason, he likes to clap back at everyone. He does talk the talk and he does walk the walk, but I'm just not a massive fan of his personality, and I think a lot of people aren't as well. I think he does come across as quite an unlikable guy. So I've got Sean O'Malley in this tier, and then right below him, I've got Ilia Topuria. Yeah, Ilia Topuria is just, again, not a really likable guy, mainly for the reason that he's probably, if you're a Volkanovski fan, and I think a large majority of the MMA fan or the MMA community are Volkanovski fans, to watch Volkanovski basically get trash talked the entirety of the build-up in that fight, and then to go out there and get knocked out by Ilia Topuria. If you're a Volkanovski fan, I can see why you might hate Ilia Topuria. He's a very loudmouth guy. He's very confident. A lot of people like him for that, but at the same time, a lot of people dislike him for that. He's extremely confident. And he's just, I also don't like the fact that he's refusing to fight a lot of these featherweights. He's calling out McGregor. He's calling out a lot of these guys in completely different divisions. Instead of fighting the contenders that he should be fighting, he should be fighting guys like Holloway when he's done with Gaethje, or at least a Movs or Evloev. I don't like the second that he's become champion, he's now shown no interest in the division. I think that's another trait that makes him unlikable, but he's a fun fighter at that, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'll put Ilia Topuria in unlikable. Not hated, but just unlikable. And now we're on the tier of fighters that are hated. People genuinely despise these champions in the UFC. And first, we've got Jon Jones. I think Jon Jones has definitely warranted a lot of the hate towards him. He's taken steroids and he's definitely made a bad mark in the sport because of that. He kind of tainted the sport for a while because he took steroids. And you look at his personal life, I'm not going to get into it now, but his personal life is just horrific. The things that this guy's done, he's just not a good guy. Jon Jones isn't a nice guy. I can see why he's an interesting fighter. Personally, I believe he is the greatest of all time, and I think his entire career in MMA is super impressive. Take away the steroids, how he was able to basically beat 3 generations of champions, and it's quite fun watching Jon Jones just dominate everyone, but he's just not a likable guy in general. He's a horrible person, and overall, yeah, he's just a hated fighter. And even nowadays, the fact that he's refusing to fight Aspinall and instead he's picking out a Stipe over Aspinall, I think that's a terrible decision move as well. Well, not a terrible decision for him because it's a free win, but it's just not what you want to see as a fan. So I'm going to put Jon Jones in hated. Definitely got one of the stronger fan bases, but at the same time, definitely one of the most hated. That is my list for the most likable UFC fighters, rated from most likable or loved to the most hated. Let me know your thoughts on all of these champions and if you like them or dislike them, and if you agree with the list. And thank you for watching.